In August 1976, two American officers walked into a patch of trees along the most dangerous border on Earth and never walked out. Their mission: trim a poplar tree blocking the view between two guard posts. Their fate: to become the trigger for the largest show of military force since the Korean War ended 23 years earlier. How did a tree nearly restart a war that had been frozen in time? Context in one breath. The Korean Demilitarized Zone, the DMZ, is a 160-mile-long, 2.5-mile-wide strip of land that has separated North and South Korea since the armistice of 1953. It is not demilitarized. It is one of the most heavily armed borders in human history, patrolled by soldiers who have spent decades staring at each other across minefields and razor wire. Every tree, every rock, every gesture carries weight. In the summer of 1976, that weight became unbearable. A single poplar tree planted decades earlier in what was called the Joint Security Area at Panmunjom stood between two worlds. And when American and South Korean forces decided to cut it down, the North responded with axes, clubs, and a violence that stunned the world. Within hours, the United States and South Korea mobilized for war. Timeline of key events. The Joint Security Area at Panmunjom was supposed to be neutral ground. American, South Korean, and North Korean forces all operated there under the terms of the armistice, maintaining checkpoints and conducting meetings in a space barely larger than a few football fields. Tensions were constant, but violence was rare, until it wasn't. On August 6, 1976, a United Nations command work detail arrived in the JSA with a simple task: prune a poplar tree near Checkpoint 3 that was blocking the line of sight between two observation posts. Source: U.S. Army Records, August 1976. The tree had been trimmed before without incident. Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett led the mission, accompanied by a South Korean work crew and a small security detail. It was supposed to take 30 minutes. Lower Third, August 6, 1976, 10:45 a.m. local time. North Korean guards arrived almost immediately. Senior Lieutenant Pak Chul, an officer known to UN forces for his aggressive behavior, approached the work site and ordered the Americans to stop. Source: eyewitness testimony, UN command investigation. Captain Boniface refused politely, explaining that the work had been authorized. Pak left. The Americans continued trimming. 15 minutes later, Pak returned with approximately 30 North Korean soldiers, some carrying axes and metal pikes. What happened next was sudden and brutal. Pak reportedly shouted a command in Korean, and the North Korean soldiers attacked. Source: declassified UN Command After Action Report, August 1976. Captain Boniface was surrounded and struck repeatedly with axes. Lieutenant Barrett attempted to help and was also beaten. South Korean workers and American soldiers fought back with fists, tree branches, anything they could find. The fighting lasted less than 4 minutes. When it ended, Captain Boniface and Lieutenant Barrett were dead. 4 American soldiers and 5 South Korean personnel were injured, some critically. The North Koreans retreated across the bridge of no return, leaving the tree standing and 2 nations on the brink of war. Source: New York Times, August 19, 1976. Pattern break. Question: what would your country do if 2 of your soldiers were murdered on neutral ground? President Gerald Ford convened the National Security Council within hours. The Pentagon drew up contingency plans for strikes into North Korea. South Korea mobilized reserve units. The USS Midway carrier battle group steamed toward the Korean peninsula at flank speed. Source: declassified NSC meeting minutes, August 18, 1976. The world held its breath, but the Americans chose a different kind of response. Not retreat, not airstrikes. Something stranger and more deliberate. They decided to finish the job. They would cut down the tree, and they would do it with the largest show of force the DMZ had ever seen. Operation Paul Bunyan began at dawn on August 21, 1976. The mission: remove the poplar tree. The plan: send a work crew protected by a force so overwhelming that North Korea would have to choose between backing down or starting a full-scale war. Source: U.S. Forces Korea Operational Records, August 1976. 2 8-man teams of Army engineers moved into the JSA with chainsaws. Behind them, a 64-man security platoon with orders to use deadly force if attacked. Overhead, 20 Cobra attack helicopters orbiting the site, loaded with rockets and miniguns. Behind the tree line, B-52 bombers flying from Guam, F-4 Phantom jets from bases in South Korea, and F-111 fighters from Okinawa, all armed and waiting for the call. Source: Military History Magazine, Operation Paul Bunyan, 2003. On the ground, American and South Korean Special Forces teams took positions within sight of North Korean bunkers. Engineers used flamethrowers to clear brush, demolition teams prepared charges to blow the bridge of no return if necessary, and artillery batteries across the DMZ unlocked their guns and swung them north. The USS Midway and its escorts anchored off the coast, flight decks crowded with aircraft ready to launch. Source: U.S. Navy Historical Archives. Lower Third, August 21, 1976, 7 a.m. Operation begins. The North Koreans watched. Hundreds of their soldiers appeared on their side of the JSA, armed and tense. For 42 minutes, the only sounds were chainsaws and rotor blades. The engineers cut the tree down in sections, carefully, methodically, while thousands of soldiers on both sides waited for someone to make a move. No one did. At 7:42 a.m., the last section of the poplar tree fell. The engineers packed their tools. The helicopters peeled away. The bombers turned back. The crisis was over. 3 days later, North Korea issued a statement. Kim Il-sung, the nation's leader, expressed regret for the incident. Not quite an apology, not quite an admission of guilt, but enough. Source: Korean Central News Agency, August 24, 1976. The United States accepted the statement without comment. The DMZ returned to its cold equilibrium. Evidence and verification. The killings were witnessed by multiple American and South Korean personnel, whose testimonies were compiled in a UN Command investigation completed within 2 weeks. Document: UN Command After Action Report, classified until 1996. Photographs taken immediately after the attack showed injuries consistent with blunt force trauma and edged weapons. Footage: declassified military photographs, available through National Archives. North Korea's version of events claimed that Captain Boniface struck Senior Lieutenant Pak first and that North Korean soldiers acted in self-defense. Source: Korean Central News Agency, August 20th, 1976. No independent observers were present, and no forensic investigation of the site was permitted by either side. The UN command rejected the North Korean account, citing the testimony of multiple witnesses and the nature of the injuries. Infocard confirmed. 2 U.S. officers killed, August 18, 1976. Disputed. Who initiated physical contact? Operation Paul Bunyan's scale is documented in declassified military records, including flight logs, troop movement orders, and communications intercepts. Source: U.S. Forces Korea, declassified 2001. The operation involved an estimated 813 personnel in the immediate area and thousands more in support roles across the region. It remains one of the largest mobilizations for a single non-combat objective in Cold War history. Conflicting views and gaps. North Korea maintained for years that the incident was provoked by American aggression and that the tree trimming was unauthorized. UN command records show that tree trimming operations had been conducted in the JSA multiple times before, without North Korean objection. Source: UN Command Operational Logs, 1970 to 1976. Why August 18th was different remains unclear. Some analysts have suggested that the attack was ordered by local commanders seeking to demonstrate strength, possibly without approval from Pyongyang. Source: Cold War International History Project Analysis, 1998. Others argue that the violence was deliberate, designed to test American resolve after the fall of Saigon in 1975. No definitive evidence supports either theory. The speed of Kim Il-sung's statement of regret 3 days later has puzzled historians. It arrived before any international mediation and before the Soviet Union or China weighed in publicly. Whether this reflected genuine concern about escalation or internal political calculations remains debated. Human impact. 2 men died for a tree. Captain Arthur Boniface was 31 years old, married, a career officer respected by his men. First Lieutenant Mark Barrett was 26 months away from completing his tour in Korea. Their families learned of their deaths through official channels hours after the attack, their bodies flown home under military escort. The survivors carried physical and psychological wounds. One American soldier lost an eye. Another suffered a fractured skull. Several South Korean workers were hospitalized for weeks. The trauma of watching friends beaten to death in what was supposed to be a routine mission haunted the witnesses for years, according to interviews conducted decades later. Source: Veterans History Project, Interviews, Library of Congress. For the soldiers who participated in Operation Paul Bunyan, the experience was surreal. Preparing for war over a tree, knowing that a single shot could kill thousands. Many later described the tension as worse than combat because the violence was potential, not certain, and the stakes were incomprehensibly high. Expert lens, Sharkinchorn. Why it matters. Operation Paul Bunyan is a case study in what strategists call escalation dominance. The idea that overwhelming force can prevent violence by making the cost of resistance unbearable. Think of it like two people in a standoff. If one suddenly brings 100 armed friends, the other usually backs down. The Americans brought an entire air force to cut down a tree, but it also reveals the fragility of peace in frozen conflicts. The DMZ had been quiet for years, but the armistice that ended the Korean War was not a peace treaty. It was a pause. Every day, soldiers on both sides lived with the knowledge that the pause could end at any moment, for any reason, even a tree. The incident changed how the Joint Security Area operated. After 1976, the JSA was physically divided by a low concrete barrier, and forces from each side no longer freely mixed. Source: UN Command JSA Regulations, amended 1976. The tree became a symbol of how small things can carry the weight of history when they sit on a border that has never healed. Mini recap. Here's what we know. 2 American officers were killed by North Korean soldiers during a tree trimming operation on August 18, 1976. The United States responded with Operation Paul Bunyan, a massive show of force that removed the tree without further violence. North Korea issued a statement of regret and the crisis ended. What we don't know, whether the attack was ordered from Pyongyang or carried out by local commanders acting on their own. We don't know what internal debates happened in North Korea during those 3 days before Kim Il-sung's statement, and we don't know if the restraint shown by both sides in that moment could happen again. The Korean Peninsula has lived with this tension for 70 years. The tree is gone, but the border remains. What's next? Scenarios. The DMZ today is quieter than it was in 1976, but not safer. Incidents still occur. Landmine explosions, defections, occasional gunfire, but none have escalated to the level of Operation Paul Bunyan. Confidence. High that both sides have learned to manage small provocations without full mobilization. Medium confidence that future incidents will be contained by the same logic that worked in 1976. The cost of war is too high. North Korea now has nuclear weapons, which changes the calculus entirely. A tree trimming incident today might not lead to chainsaws and helicopters. It might lead to something no one can control.
If you found this story informative and well presented, please consider like the video and subscribing to the channel.
Low confidence that the underlying tension will resolve in the near term. The armistice is 72 years old. No peace treaty has been signed. The border is still armed, still watched, still waiting. The tree was never really the problem. It was just the excuse. Outro and CTA. In the end, Operation Paul Bunyan was about more than a tree. It was about showing that power, carefully used, can prevent war instead of starting one. 2 men died in a moment of violence that still feels senseless 50 years later. A tree was cut down by the most expensive lumberjacks in history, and the world stepped back from the edge one more time. If this story fascinated you, watch next. The axe murder incident inside the Joint Security Area, for a deeper look at the geography and psychology of the world's most dangerous border. Source notes and disclaimer. This script is based on declassified U.S. and UN command documents, contemporaneous news reports from the New York Times and other outlets, and academic analyses from the Cold War International History Project. North Korean sources are limited and often contradictory. Some details, particularly regarding internal decision-making in Pyongyang, remain unknown. This video presents confirmed facts alongside clearly labeled uncertainties and will be updated if new evidence emerges.